leadership. I'm going to hand over full hosting to Rabbi Manning.
Thank you, Rabbi Chapman. I really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your help and introduction and guidance and general logistic support, which is great. I want to just reiterate what Rabbi Chapman said. Having your cameras on is helpful to me because I get to see real people rather than just names. Obviously, if you're in the bath or in your pajamas or something like that, please, I'd rather you didn't have your cameras on in that case. So that's fine. So whatever's good for you is good for me. But the more people you see as a teacher, the easier it is. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, we talked about fetal reductions and looked at some of the issues of the status of the fetus in halacha and why it could be that we would be allowed to terminate a fetus. Isn't that a potential life, etc.? We'll reiterate some of those questions today. Last week, we looked at embryo screening and genetic modification of embryos. We were really back in the lab at the beginning of the whole process of fertilization, and we looked at a lot of the issues there. Are we allowed to play God? What's called playing God? Are we into interacting and intervening, or are we into kind of holding back and letting nature take its course? We looked at a lot of those sources last week. This week, I want to fast forward to the issue of conjoined twins. Technically speaking, I don't think it's not really the unborn child anymore, because we're dealing with twins which have been born already, which are joined together. But a lot of the issues that we dealt with over the last 2 weeks will really come together to try and understand what to do with this. I doubt that anybody in this Zoom has been personally connected, that wasn't meant to be a pun, but personally involved with any kind of case of conjoined twins. They are an extreme rarity, only one in many thousands, tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of births will result in conjoined twins. But there have been a number of very famous cases. Some of them have been followed by the media as they've grown older, etc. And I brought in the footnotes on the share today, many of those cases too. So what I want to look at is some of the halakhic issues, particularly in the very famous 1977 case of baby A and baby B, which was a couple from Lakewood in America, where the wife gave birth to two little girls, and they were joined together. We'll see how they were joined together as we get through. And there was a clear situation there that one of the baby, if they left them conjoined, then both of the babies would die. And they had to decide whether they could sacrifice one. These obviously were born, they were not fetuses, where they could sacrifice one in order to save the other. Now, that's not just a case of terminating a fetus, that is a case of terminating a life in order to save another life, which is something that we do not do under normal circumstances, but these are not normal circumstances. So we will look at the psak, at the ruling that was given in that case of Rav Moshe Feinstein in 1977, and we will look at the analysis of two of his students, two of his Talmidim, Dr. Moshe Tendler, Professor Moshe Tendler, who was a professor of biology, he's now retired in America, who was also the son-in-law of Rav Moshe Feinstein, who understood the ruling to be because of one reason, and Rabbi Dr. J. David Bleich, who is a very eminent lawyer, physician, and Rosh Hashiva in America as well, who understood the reasoning to be different, which is fascinating. Rav Moshe Feinstein never wrote this case up as a tshuva. I'm not sure why that is, but he never included it in his own writings, so it was up to his Talmidim, up to the people who were with him, to try and explain why he said what he said, and what the background reasoning was. But we'll get to that in a few moments when we get to the case of baby A and baby B. Okay, conjoined twins, as we know, is a natural phenomenon. As I said, very, very rare. Most of them die within a very short time. Most of them are stillborn. Another third die within around 24 hours. Most live births are actually female. It's quite rare that you will get a case of male conjoined twins. But it does happen, and of course the most famous case, which we'll get to, which was the so-called Siamese twins, was of course two men. There are theories as to what causes Siamese twins, or conjoined twins they're really called today. The most accepted theory is that there's an egg which has been fertilized, which then starts to separate to form twins, but does not separate fully and leaves it conjoined in the middle, and then babies develop in that way in the womb. There are other theories that two fertilized eggs could fuse in certain ways. That's beyond my pay grade to speculate on which of those medical theories is right. But there's the reality is that conjoined twins is a phenomenon recorded already from the ancient world. That I've put in the footnotes here. I'll share the sources with you in a minute. Augustine of Hippo in the City of God in the 5th century records a case of conjoined twins. There are even earlier ones. And the Gemara, we'll see soon, is one of the most detailed ancient sources on conjoined twins. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But they are, as I said, a natural phenomenon which has been with us for a long time. There was a famous case that's recorded by many of the Jewish medieval authorities of a case in the Arab countries in the 13th century where a woman there was a woman A and a woman B who were joined together, and the woman A wanted to get married. And woman B petitioned that she was not prepared to get married. She didn't consent to it. And she felt embarrassed that this her conjoined twin would be in a marital relationship with a man, and she would be exposed, if you like, and she wasn't married to him. And they went to court, and the Arab rulers at the time said to Mrs. or Miss B, please stand on your feet. And Miss B couldn't do that because she was very much the parasitic twin. And Miss A, she said, Miss A, please stand on your feet. And she did, and dragged the other woman with her. And the ruler of this is a medieval Islamic case, said clearly A is the real person, B is just an appendage, if you like, of the person. And therefore I'm going to allow A to get married. The result of that case, as it's recorded, is that A did get married, and B died actually from the embarrassment at being in the situation which she felt was mortifying. And because B died, A then died a short time later because she had this kind of dead conjoined twin attached to her. So everything had a very unhappy ending. As I say, that wasn't a Jewish case, but that's a case recorded by the Jewish authorities of a medieval background. So let me share the screen with you and we'll see. Again, please feel free to jump in at any point, ask any questions, and then we can take the case, the whole situation forward. So I've brought here on the very famous case of the Bunker twins. The Bunkers, who were of course originally from Siam, as it was then called, Thailand as it is now called, spent most of their life in America, and they actually were the original case of Siamese twins, Chang and Eng Bunker. They were joined at the chest, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more later on, but they actually went on to get married, both of them. They each married twins, actually, English girls, sisters who were twins. They weren't conjoined, they were separate. The family, actually, the English family, was very upset that these girls married the Bunker twins, not because they were conjoined twins, but because they were Asian, and they were not happy about their daughters marrying to an Asian family, okay? But anyway, they did marry them, and initially they had a sort of complicated arrangement with one big bed for all four of them. Don't know what you call that exactly, I'm sure there's a name for it. But in the end, the two women fell out with each other. The sisters, who were now sisters-in-law, fell out with each other, and they had to spend half of their life in one house and then half of their life in the other house. And they had many, many offspring. They actually had 11 surviving offspring from these two Chang brothers. And there now are in America on a regular basis conventions where all the Chang descendants come together to celebrate the life of their illustrious great-great-great-grandparents, etc. But that is perhaps the most famous case of conjoined twins, hence the name Siamese twins that became known. I brought you here some of the medical details, how conjoined twins are attached. Some of them are fused in the upper body, sharing a heart, sometimes a liver. Some of them are fused in the lower body, usually not sharing a heart, but sharing a digestive system, often a liver, diaphragm, etc. Some of them are parasitic. We'll talk about a classic case recorded in the Jewish sources of parasitic twins, where one is basically fully formed and the other is almost an appendage asymmetrically on the side. And some are fused at the head, and they have entirely separate bodies, but they have two heads joined together, usually at the back of the head or the side of the head, but obviously much more difficult to separate in the head. Now, classically, there was no way to separate conjoined twins. They just didn't know how to do that until modern medicine enabled them to do that. Now there have been many cases of separations of conjoined twins. Obviously, the more they share in terms of vital organs, the more difficult it is. And as I said before, one of the main questions we're going to be asking today is this famous case of baby A and baby B, where they wanted to separate them, but that separation would, of necessity, kill one of the twins. We'll talk about that as we go through. Now, halakhic issues. There are all sorts of halakhic issues I'd like to throw up at this stage, throw out at this stage that may, we're not going to deal with all of these. We're really going to deal with the separation issue. But think about the following. Are they allowed to get married? Let's say you have twin sisters and they want to get married. Is that even possible halachically? Do they marry one man? If he gives them a ring, a kiddushin, is that good for both of them? Do they marry two different men? And if so, is that a case of adultery? When one of the men sleeps with his wife, is that really, sleeping with another wife at the same time if another man is married to them? Is there an incestuous relationship of a man marrying two sisters? Is it one woman or two? Is it a problem that he has two wives? Do both sisters have to consent? What if one of them says yes and the other one says, I'm not quite sure, like that case in the Arab lands? Is that called rape? Interestingly, if the man has a sexual relationship with the consenting twin, but the other twin objects, is that still called a rape? I don't know if there's any English law precedent to this, but that's an interesting question in halacha as well. What about conjoined brothers? Is there a problem of you're sleeping with your brother's wife if one of them has a relation? Like I mentioned, that the Changs each had a wife, and they made arrangements for that. In any event, there are going to be major halakhic problems as to whether they can have any kind of intimate relationship when one of them is going to be present. You're not allowed to have that, obviously, with another person present. Therefore, it's going to be practically very difficult to ever find a rabbi. I don't know if there's ever been a wedding under a chuppah of conjoined twins. I suspect the answer is there hasn't. But in the case of the Changs, they didn't obviously ask a shaila because they weren't Jewish. But these are all issues that arise. There are any number of theoretical halakhic issues that you can think of as well. If one of the boys has to do yibum, let's say, because the elder brother dies, is it the left one or the right one that does it? Which is the main one in that sense? Do you count for a minyan twice? If you have a pair of conjoined twins who join the minyan, are they one or are they two? Does it depend if they have two heads or two bodies, etc.? How do you define that? Do they get two portions of the inheritance or one? That's actually could be quite an important financial point, not just a theoretical point. All of these are really dealt with and discussed as we go through, but the real live question is the one I want to deal with right now, which is the case of baby A and baby B. Some of you may remember this. I do not remember this. I was only 9 years old at the time, but some of you may remember this case. In 1977 in America, there was a Jewish family in Lakewood who had two little girls, baby A and baby B. They were conjoined. They were flown to the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, where Everett Koop, who was later to become the Surgeon General of the United States, he was the chief surgeon there, and they asked him what they could do. Now, these twins shared internal organs, including, critically here, a 6-chambered heart. Now, normally a heart has 4 chambers. So here there was really a proper heart, a normal, quote unquote, heart, and another 2 chambers tacked onto the side, the theory being that the 2 chambers were the deformed heart, if you like, of the lesser developed twin, which were tacked on to the heart. They asked Everett Koop whether they could separate the twins, and he said if they separated them, the only one that they could save was baby B. He said baby A was not capable of being saved because she had other circulatory problems. Therefore, they had to be separated. If not, they would both die. And if they were separated, they had to kill A to save B, because there was no point killing B because A would not survive independently. Now, Dr. Koop was a very frum Christian. He was a Presbyterian, very religious, and many of his team were also religious Christians. And he decided, because it was a Jewish family, to refer the question to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein was living in the Lower East Side at that point. He was already, I suspect, in his 70s or 80s. But he had a family, many of whom were eminent surgeons and biologists, etc. And this question was referred to Rav Moshe. It was just before Sukkot, and he was asked to opine and give a psak as to how they should separate them and who they should save. They were all very anxious because time was of the essence. Rav Moshe took a few days to do it. I quote here in the middle from Rav Moshe Tendler, who was very much involved in this. Rav Moshe Tendler is Rav Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law. Rav Moshe Feinstein is no longer alive. He died in the 80s, but Rav Moshe Tendler is very elderly now in America. And he quotes Dr. Koop. He was very involved in this at the time, saying the following: "The ethics and morals involved in this decision are too complex for me," said the doctor. "I believe they are too complex for you as well," he said to his team. "Therefore, I referred it to an old rabbi in the Lower East Side of New York. He is a great scholar, a saintly individual. He knows how to answer such questions. When he tells me, I too will know." And he referred it to Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe gave a psak eventually. It was not, as I said, recorded in his official responsa, but Rabbi J. David Bleich and Rabbi Moshe Tendler, who was very involved at the time as his son-in-law, later gave the reasoning for this psak. And we'll see what the psak was, and we'll see what happened as we go through. Okay, so that's the case. The first obvious question we need to decide is, are these conjoined twins halachically one person, or are they two people? Because if we decide they're one person, then we don't have a problem. If they're really one person and there's a little bit hanging off the side, then that's no different to amputating a limb which is causing a health problem, which obviously is fine. If they're one person, you could just get rid of whatever it is that's affecting the life and the health quality of health of the main one, and then just go on from there. So that's not even a problem. The problem is going to be if we decide that there are two people, and that might depend on how they look. That is it one body with two heads, which could be, is it two bodies with two heads? How are they joined? And in fact, the Gemara asks this question. Have a look at number one. If anyone says, does the Gemara ask all the questions? One of my Rosh Yeshiva once told me, no one should ever say that Judaism has all the answers, but for sure, Judaism asks all the questions. That's I think that was a good line, and you can see it here. Look at number one. Boy mine plimi mi Rebbe. Plimo, I should say. Plimo, which is interesting, is a Latin name. Plimo, one of the rabbis in the yeshiva, asked from Rebbe. Rebbe is Rabbi Huda Hanassi. So we're dealing here around the 2nd century CE. It's not clear exactly what this case was. There was a case which was recorded by Cassius Dio at the time of a conjoined twin who lived at that time. It could be it's the same case that the Gemara is discussing, but he asked the rabbi of the yeshiva as follows: Mi sheyesh lo shnei roshim, someone who has two heads. Be'ezeh mehem maniach tefillin. Which head does he wear his tefillin on? Good question. Okay. What was the answer? Amalei, he responded to him, get out of here. Or kum gali, or take yourself to exile, or kabel alecha shamto, or receive, accept excommunication. Meaning, I am sick of people asking me stupid questions. Rashi says, he said to him, you're making fun of me. How can you ask me which head he wears tefillin on? Can you think of a better shaila than that? So the Gemara says, Adahachi, it happened not long after that, Atahahu Gavra, a man came along to the Bet Midrash, and Amalei asked the following: It's Yaldili Yanuka the Islay Trey Roshi. My wife has given birth to a little boy with two heads. Kama Ba'inan Lemesa the Kohen. How much do I need to give to the Kohen for Pidyon Haben? This is a case where two heads are not necessarily better than one. So how much do I need to give? Normally it's 5 coins. So do I give 5 because it's one person, or do I give 10 because it's 2 people? So now Rabbi Yehuda Anasi had to take it seriously because there was a real case. Asahu Sabat and the answer was towards Chayv Liten Lo Yud Slaim. He has to give double the money, implying that it sounds like they're 2 people. The Begulgolet Talia Rachmana, because it depends on the number of heads. At least for Pidyon Haben, it depends on the number of heads. The Gemara therefore concludes that a baby with 2 heads the father is liable for double the money. It doesn't answer about the tefillin, by the way. Why can't the baby just wear two pairs of tefillin when he grows up? Well, what's wrong with putting on 2 pairs of tefillin? So the answer is you can't put on extra pairs of tefillin because it would be the prohibition of Baal Tosef. The Torah says to put on 1 pair of tefillin, 1 head and 1 arm. You can't just double it up. Unless, of course, you say that 1 head could wear Rashi tefillin and 1 head could wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. That would be a good compromise. By the way, there are people you should know who wear 2 sets of tefillin because 1 Rashi, 1 Rabbeinu Tam. because it's not clear exactly what the correct final answer of the tefillin is. That the only difference between Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin is in the order of the parshas. Rashi tefillin go 1, 2, 3, 4 in chronological order, and Rabbeinu Tam go 1, 2, 4, 3. So there are people who wear 2 sets of tefillin, usually one after the other, but actually in Israel, you do see Sfaradim who are wearing both sets of tefillin at the same time. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone in shul wearing 2 sets of tefillin at the same time. They were little tefillin, 2 on the arm, 2 on the head, and 1 they cover over. It doesn't work if you're a Chabadnik who wears these big tefillin. You'd have to have a head like this in order to fit that on. But if you wear little tefillin, then you're doing well. Fine. There's a fascinating Tosfos that takes us into a slightly different realm. Tosfos on this particular Gemara raise a very weird midrash, which actually may be relevant to us. Look in Tosfos here. He says, "Ba'olam hazeh leka," we don't ever find in this world people with 2 heads. They'd obviously never come across any conjoined twins. Again, they almost never survived in the up until the modern era. Aval yesh b'medrash, he says, but I'll tell you a medrash. This is a medieval authority's 13th century. Ashmedai, there was a demon, they call, and we'll see in a minute why this is relevant, called Ashmedai. Haiti mitachas kacha brought up a demon from under the ground. Adam echad sheyesh lo shnei rashim, with 2 heads. Lifnei Shlomo HaMelech, and he brought him before Shlomo, King Solomon. V'nasa isha, this man married a woman who was normal with 1 head. V'hoilid banim, and they had children. Kiyotze bo b'shnei rashim, some of them had 2 heads like him. Or kiyotze be'ishta, and some had 1 head like his wife, b'rosh echad. Now, again, this is not genetically, literal, because conjoined twins is not, I think, a genetic thing. And when they came to divide up the family estate, the people with 2 heads demanded 2 portions. Now, again, this is a medrash. This is not an account of something that actually happened. But when the rabbis create midrash, they're creating a framework through which to understand a deeper idea. And actually, Tosfos doesn't answer what happened, but the later, more mystical authorities actually answer a very interesting thing, that Shlomo said to his servants, again, please, this is not something that happened, so don't get distressed by this, pour boiling water over 1 of the heads and see if the other one screams. Because if the other one doesn't scream, then you'll know that they're really 1 person. It's just him. But if the other one screams, even though there was no water on him, then that means that they're 2 different people. Now, this medrash is very interesting because it's suggesting that what constitutes 2 different people is down to the linkage of their nervous systems as well. And it all goes to this very critical and very difficult, tricky issue. Are they 1 person or are they 2 people? How do you do a test? Is it a physiological test? Again, because this is a halachic question. You need a halachic answer to a halachic test. Now, we have a bigger issue, which is, are we allowed to learn halacha from a midrash? Maybe not, in which case maybe this is irrelevant to us. But deciding whether they are 1 or 2 people is always going to be the first critical question. And fascinatingly, this is raised in the classic sources, like we've said before. And maybe the issue is independent thinking, by the way, conjoined twins cranially can actually see things through the other one's eyes. It's the most remarkable thing. One of them can say, when one of them is looking at this, the other one can say, I sense also what they're looking. They're obviously sharing certain neural pathways that allow them to sense what the other one is. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon. There is another precedent. You see this picture here? This fellow here, this is a very dapper-looking 17th century gent who is actually recorded in the Jewish sources as well. This was a case of something called the Colloredo twins in Italy. The Colloredo twins, Lazarus and Battista, had a parasitic arrangement. And one of them was fairly normal, as it were, walked around on 2 legs. And the other one, you can see there, this is a painting done at the time. The other one was clearly parasitic. It was not fully formed at all, was a head and part of a torso sort of upside down with legs kind of dangling down. Why this became particularly a problem is at the time in Italy, Lazarus, the one that was able-bodied, hit another man and killed him. And the Italian courts sentenced him to death for murder. And the other twin appealed, the one that was hanging down, and said, that's not fair. You can't kill him because you'll be killing me, and I didn't do anything wrong because I'm just a parasitic twin. So that's not fair at all. And the courts actually heard that, and they agreed. They commuted the death penalty because of that. But what we found interesting is that this comes up in the responsa of the time, number 4. Look at this. The Rav Yisrael Chagiz in the 17th century in Italy writes the following. I remember seeing in the Italian lands, Goy Echad, a non-Jew, Keben Chafhei, who was around 25 years old, Shanim, Shinoila Davuk Im Tulmo Ada Tabur. He was joined to the navel with another twin. Chazeh Keneged Chazeh, chest against chest. V'sham nidbaku, that's why they were conjoined, he says. V'hu ayaholech v'shalem, he was the main one was walking around able-bodied, k'shar b'nei adam, v'rosh katan, and then there was a little head that was hanging down, l'tzad echad, v'raglav tzluyas u'magias ada arkivosaf, and the legs reached the knees of the other man, of the gadol, of the main one. V'loi hayabor hagasha klal, ele ke'evish nidbatel chusha. Oh, interesting. He says the other one really didn't feel anything. He was almost like a paralyzed limb on the other side of his body. But they were able to live like that many years with the twin. And the question is, if you killed this, and this is why this is important to us, what if I kill this parasitic twin? Is this murder or is this not murder? He asked this question then in the 17th century. So he answers, Ve'efshar, it could be, Ladona Kedin Goses. He is like a human who's alive, but is very critically ill. Because obviously this parasitic twin has no ability to survive on its own. And therefore this tshuva, this response from the 17th century suggests that the parasitic twin was a goses. Now a goses, as I said, is somebody who is extremely ill, probably going to die. You're still not allowed to kill. In fact, we're very strict. You're not even allowed to touch a goses because that may itself hasten the person's death. It is still considered murder to kill even somebody, obviously, who's critically ill. So if, again, this response is quite, authoritative, which it is pretty, it seems that we cannot, there's no way we can just cut off this other parasitic twin as an appendage, even if we say that one is clearly parasitic to the other. So they're the basic historical sources. You've got the Gemara, as I said, in Menachos, and the commentary on that as to how to tell whether they're one or two people. And then you have the 17th century account of the Colorado twins and what the halacha would be if you killed the parasite. Okay, so everybody clear so far? Hopefully so. Now, fast forward to 1977. Rav Moshe Feinstein was called. He gave the psak that it was possible to go ahead with the surgery. On October the 6th, he told the doctor Koop, that he may go ahead. He may cut off twin A and kill her in the process. And on October the 11th, they did that. The surgery, obviously, in 77 was very complex. Now I'm sure that the surgery would be a lot more straightforward in the advances that have been made. But baby B survived the surgery. It went as well as they could have hoped, and baby A was sadly sacrificed. So what was the basis for that psak? Why did Rav Moshe Feinstein say that we could cut off the parasitic twin to save the other one? It's a human being. So the first question was, is it one or two people? And Rav Moshe clearly immediately said, it's clearly two people. They have independent brains. They have independent nervous systems. They were unquestionably two people. That wasn't even a question at all. Was there a dominant twin? That's a question. So in this case, Dr. Koop said that B was definitely the dominant twin. A had circulatory problems, could never have survived independently. B, on the other hand, was capable of being saved. And he speculated, and Rav Bleich said this is speculation, that the heart really belonged to B. Meaning, remember, they had a 6-chambered heart, a regular 4 chambers, and then 2 tacked on. So Dr. Koop said, I think that the B has the heart, and A has the 2 extra chambers, and that's why B is the dominant twin. Rav Bleich later, and I brought you in the footnote, said, it's not clear to me whether that is the only obvious answer that you could give. Why don't they both own the hearts together? Why does one own the heart rather than the other? Because they both use the heart. There was blood moving between these different chambers. Obviously, it was all not in a normal formation, but the doctor clearly decided that B was dominant, and certainly Rav Moshe Tendler felt that that was a major reason for the decision. So let's have a look at why we think the decision was made. So like I said at the beginning, there are two different sets of reasoning as to why Rav Moshe Feinstein said what he said. Rav Moshe Tendler, who is his son-in-law, and who he actually moved in. Rav Moshe Feinstein moved in with his daughter and his son-in-law for this whole process to discuss with them. Rav Moshe Tendler actually thinks that the reasoning is very straightforward, and it is based on the idea of roidef. Okay, again, feel free to chip in if you have any questions along the way, but it's based on the idea of rodef. What's rodef? Let's have a look. We saw this source a couple of weeks ago. Let's have a look at it again. Source number 5. Ha'isha shehi makshe leiled. If a woman is having difficulty giving birth, we may cut up the fetus inside her, and take it out limb by limb. We may, and maybe even we must. That's a whole discussion. Must we? But we may kill the fetus, cut it out, and save the mother. Her life comes before the fetus. Yatsuruba, but once the fetus emerges, and we talked about this in the first shear, the head emerges mostly, or the body emerges breech. Ein noigimba, we may not touch the baby to save the mother. She'ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh, because we can't set one life off against another life. That's the general position. When the baby is in utero, the baby is not considered. We saw Rashi in the first year. He's not considered a true person. It's not born yet. It's not a full life. Whereas once the baby has been born, then we can't kill a baby to save the mother. That's what we're not able to do, because we can't kill one person to save another person. Why? How do we know? Why can't you kill one person to save another? So here's the key thing. Because we say, how do we know that your blood is redder than this blood? Look at number 6. We saw this source, but let's see it again. How do we know I'm not allowed to kill someone to save another? Svarahi, it's logical, says the Gemara. Someone once asked Rabbi the following question. Amalei said to him, Amali Maridura, if the general said to me of the town, Katle Laplani, you must shoot this other guy. The Eloi Katlin Lach, or I'm going to shoot you. Shoot him or I'll shoot you. The answer is Nekatlech, you have to be killed. Velotiktol, and you may not kill to save your own life. Why? How do you know that your blood is redder than his? Meaning there is no way to value life. Two people who are alive cannot be set off against each other. And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says this very beautifully in a source we didn't see in the first year, but he says it in the following words. Look at number 7. He says, Ki ha'inyan shel chayim, because from a Jewish perspective, life, ein lanu shum knei midah, we have no measuring stick. Kama limdod et yokram, how to measure the value of life, the chashivutam, or the importance of life. I feel a loy b'torah mitzvahs. We can't value that. Even in Torah, in terms of how much Torah will they do, there's no way you can value life. Sheharei machalin and Shabbos, because we are machalin Shabbos, we break Shabbos. Gamal zakin chayle, even if it's for an incredibly elderly person. Mukashchin, who is critically ill. Afal pishu hu chayresh, even if he is a chayresh shotagama, if he's completely demented, he has no quality of life, he's unable to recover, it doesn't matter. We will break Shabbos to extend the life even of a terribly ill person, an old, sick person. They're worth no less than a young, healthy person. Even if that person can never do another mitzvah. Even though their lives are a burden, a burden on their family. And you might say, well, it's a mercy to let them die. Let's not know. Even if the family are being drained by this individual, and they're being really pained by this reality. We still have to make Shabbos to save it. We never value life. But there are 2 cases in which we do, and that's the key. One of them is the fetus, as Rashi said. How do you know whose blood is redder? Well, in the case of the fetus, you do know whose blood is redder, The mother's blood is red because the fetus is not yet alive. And therefore, that's why you can kill the fetus to save the mother. So that's a case where we do know. And the case of the rodef. Remember the case of the rodef? The case of the rodef where somebody is pursuing another to kill them. You have an obligation to stop the rodef, if necessary, by killing him or her, in order to save the person being pursued. Why? How can you kill one person to save another? Because they're not equal anymore. The rodef has blood in a sense which is less red than the other one, because they are actively pursuing somebody else. That, if you like, lowers the level of their life versus life. Even, as we said in the first share, if they're innocent, even if they're innocent. If an innocent person is by mistake targeting another one in target practice, they think they're shooting an animal, but actually they're about to shoot another person. So you can still count them as a rodef. So the Rav Moshe Tendler felt very strongly that Rav Moshe Feinstein's reasoning was based on rodef. He said here was a case that they discussed when they were discussing it through the night on the deliberations. They said, let's say two men jump out of a burning aeroplane, and the parachute of the first man opens, but the parachute of the second man doesn't open. And as the second man is shooting down, he grabs the legs of the first man to hang on, and there's only one parachute there. Is the first man allowed to kick off the second man in order to save his own life? It's a classic. And the answer is yes, of course he is. The second man is a rodef. Oh, yeah, but he's just trying to save his own life. He's a terrible victim of circumstances. He's not an evil pursuer. Doesn't matter. He is draining away the life of the first man. He can kick him off. Another classic, application. I brought you a clip for a really dramatic video clip of a movie. I can't remember what the movie was called, but I brought you a reference to it in the footnotes of a rope accident where there's a family, on a rope climbing up a, rock climbing, whatever, and somebody falls off and then is dragging them all down. And the father is saying that you've got to cut the rope and sacrifice me because the rope won't hold us if we all hang on the rope. Is the son allowed to cut the rope, let the father fall to his death in order to save his life and maybe the life of other people up the rope? And the answer to that question is yes, they are. Because the father, people weighing them down, in that case, is a rodef. And therefore, Rav Moshe Tendler came to the very clear understanding that his father-in-law allowed baby A to be cut away precisely for this reason. Because baby A was a rodef, she was actually actively pursuing the life of baby B. She was the drain on its resources, and he based this very clearly on the doctor's analysis. The doctor said that baby A is the parasite, baby B is the healthy baby or healthier, and therefore he said because of the din of rodef, that was what they were able to do. And if you look at the analysis here, number 11, you'll see Rav Moshe Tendler wrote it up. Let's see what he said. While in the uterine environment, the child is totally dependent on the mother's life forces. Thus, either the mother's death or the fetus's death would result in a fetus that was not viable. This complete dependency on the mother, so that if the mother dies, the fetus will die, is the reason for giving the mother priority over the fetus. She is the source of the fetal life. The fetus doesn't have a life of its own. Its blood is less red. The mother is the source of the life. Once the head appears, however, and the child is able to breathe independently, he is treated as an entity separate from the mother. He's now independent of the mother's circulatory and respiratory systems. Fine. Rav Feinstein compared the case of the Siamese twins to this classic case of the conflict for survival between a mother in childbirth and the fetus. Baby A has no independent ability to survive. Her entire survival was completely dependent on her sister, who had the circulatory system to back up the functioning of the heart and liver. To Rav Feinstein's critical question, can the heart be given to baby A and she would live? Dr. Kub responded, no. There is no way to save baby A. The issue is only should both die or should baby B be saved? Without the attempted separation, both would surely die, and therefore in halachic terminology, we classify the baby that had no independent survival, baby A, as a rodef, as a pursuer, as if she were pursuing her sister and threatening her life. Further sophisticated testing has determined that the halachic concept of dependency was indeed the relationship between the twins. The two-chambered heart, which was the heart of baby A, was receiving its blood through two apertures leaking from the four-chambered heart. Except for that contribution of blood to the two chambers, baby A would have died in utero. So baby B was feeding baby A. She was almost like the mother in this analogy. Baby B was the mother, baby A was the fetus. And therefore baby A's life was subordinate to baby B. And this was the analysis that allowed the surgery to proceed. Okay. Rav J. David Bleich, who, by the way, is a phenomenal individual. Both of these people are phenomenal individuals. But if you ever get the chance to read any of Rabbi Bleich's material, Rabbi Bleich is a top physician, he's a top lawyer, he's a Rosh Yeshiva. One can only imagine the nachas that his mother gets from her son that is a doctor and a lawyer and a Rosh Yeshiva. Every Jewish mother's dream, perhaps. Okay, but Rabbi Bleich is a prolific writer on many, many issues. And he was very, very negative. He said that is not the reason of Rav Moshe Feinstein, because he felt that there was no way to determine that B was really the owner of the heart. He says that it wasn't clear that B was the owner of the heart. Why couldn't they own the hearts jointly? Who's to say that A didn't own part of the heart, that you could just cut her away? He didn't. He said that was not why Rav Moshe said what he said. Why did Rav Moshe say what he said? Now, this is a bit complicated, but let's try and get it clear. Rav Bleich said that the reasoning was a combination of two factors. Rodef was part of it, but another part of it was the issue of the famous case of Sheva ben Bichri. What was the famous case of Sheva ben Bichri? So let's have a look at it right now. Again, I keep saying this, but if you have any questions, let me know, or we can have questions at the end. Look at number 12. Number 12 is the case that we started looking at 2 weeks ago, but we need to look at properly now. Says the Tosefta, which is like the slightly later than the Mishnah before the Gemara. Siyah shel bnei Adam, if there was a caravan of people, a group of people, she'amru lahem goyim, and non-Jews captured them, and they said, Tznu lanu echad mikem, give us one of your number, v'nergu, and then we'll kill them. Ve'im lav hari anu horigim et kulchem, but if not, we're going to kill all of you. Can you give them a sacrifice to save? Do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? Says the Gemara, says the Sefta, Yargu Kulam. No, they all must be killed. They may not hand over a sacrifice to save themselves. They can't do that, even though they're not killing him. But if they specified the individual and they said, we want that one, so then you can hand him over. And we talked about this. Sheva ben Bichri was a rebel against King David. He holed himself up in a city, and Yoav, the general, came and said, besiege the city. And the Isha Chachama, the wise woman of the city, came and said, why are you killing us all? And Yoav said, because we need that guy. So she said, well, you should. Why didn't you tell us that? Just we'll throw him over. And she chopped off his head and threw him over. And that was the end of it. So they can, because he was being identified, you could hand him over. Fine. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda comes along and is more lenient and says, when can you not hand over a victim? When they're in different places. But they're all in the same boat. Since he's going to get killed in any event, they can give him over. And finally, Rav Shimon says, no, it's not true. You have to be liable. Even if they're specified, you may not hand him over unless he is a murderer like Sheva ben Bichri. Sheva ben Bichri was liable to the death penalty. So says Rabbi Shimon, that's why they could hand him over. But if he were innocent, you can't hand over an innocent person, even if they've been specified. So this becomes a real debate in the later poskim, meaning, do they have to be guilty in some way to hand them over? Everybody agrees that if there's no one specified, then you can't hand somebody over. But if they are specified, do they have to be guilty, or is it enough that they're specified even if they're innocent? And that becomes a debate all the way through the sources. And I brought you, there's a Talmud Yerushalmi that brings two opinions on this. And then in the Rishonim, in the medieval authorities, Rashi brings both views. The Meiri, the Ran, and the Rishonim go like the lenient view that you can hand him over even if he's not guilty, but he's specified. The Rambam goes like the more stringent view that he has to be guilty to hand him over. And the Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions. Interesting, it sits on the fence. And there are different different approaches as to which we think is the weighty opinion. Again, just to clarify, what are we saying? If somebody is specified and we say we need to kill you to save somebody else, do they have to be guilty in some way to be handed over? Or is it enough that they've been specified to be handed over? And Rabbi Bleich concludes here, number 15, in light of the because why don't you turn around and say, well, baby A has been designated, if you like, as being the one that needs to be handed over to save the lives of everybody, of baby B. Why don't we say that? So Rabbi Bleich says, because we're not sure that that's the halacha. In light of the unresolved controversy between early day authorities with regard to the matter, a rabbinic decisive would find grave difficulty in sanctioning an overt act designed to extinguish the life of one twin on the basis of this consideration alone. So he says you can't just hand over baby A to save baby B, because baby A is not guilty of anything. So in fact, he said, the thinking of Rav Moshe Feinstein was this, and this is the key point. It wasn't just a question of Rodef. It was a combination of Rodef and this case of the designated person. And he wanted to say like this, basically. Baby A is chasing baby B, and baby B is chasing baby A, and I can't tell you which of them is the Rodef and which of them is the victim. It's not like the parachute case. Because in the case of the parachute, the guy hanging onto his legs is clearly the one that is threatening the life of the two of them. So you can cut him loose. He said, that's not the case here. It's not clear, said Rabbi Bleich, whether baby A is really threatening baby B or baby B is also threatening baby A. But I'll tell you what is clear. Baby A's life is definitely shorter in potential than baby B's life. That's for sure. That we know for certain. And therefore he said that Rav Moshe Feinstein, his thinking was really the following, that since there's a different degree of life, the baby B has a longer lifespan, if you like, ahead of them, if they're saved, then there's two people chasing each other, but there's an unequal balance there. And one is more chasing the other than the other is chasing the one. And therefore, Rav Bleich understood that Rav Moshe Feinstein said this was a case of unequal pursuers. And in a case of unequal pursuers, we can go for the one which is has the longer life. We can save that one, not the other. Yes, Martin.
Aren't you contradicting what you said earlier on?
When?
Earlier on, you said you can't say one person's blood is redder than the others. But here you are saying baby's A's blood, ignoring the Rodef thing, baby A's blood is not as red as baby's B's.
Right, but the point is you can't ignore the Rodef thing, because the Rodef thing is the exception to the rule that you can say that one blood is redder than the other. We saw there were two exceptions. One was the fetus, which is entirely dependent on the mother, which is less alive, and the other one is the Rodef. The problem with the case of the Rodef is we can't just, so in the Rodef case, we can say your blood is less red than the other one. But the problem, says Rabbi Bleich, is I don't know which one is chasing which one. Who is the Rodef and who is not? It's not so straightforward like there's the case of the parachute. And therefore he said Rav Moshe could not have just said A is the Rodef, cut her away and save B, because they're chasing each other. It has to be a combination of the Rodef factor, which gets rid of the problem of blood redder, that does, but you can measure Rodef, he said. That's the idea. You can be more chasing him than he's chasing you. And that allows you to go in there and kill A to save B. And everyone agrees that they did give that psak, that Rav Moshe gave the psak, that baby A could be killed because he was an unequal Rodef to save baby B, okay? What is the postscript here? By the way, not everyone agreed with this. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky at the time said that baby A could not be killed. And I put in the footnotes suggestions as to why Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky may have held that view and disagreed with Rav Moshe. This was a controversial psak. The postscript here is a little bit tragic. It's very tragic that baby A was killed, baby B survived, but then unfortunately, due to a blood transfusion, baby B caught hepatitis and baby B died a few weeks later as well. So in the end, both of them died, okay, which was very traumatic for everybody. But what the case did is it really focused everybody's minds on this issue and this particular case as to how to analyze this and under what circumstances. Because now, since then, we've undertaken, I don't think in the Jewish world, but in the world at large, we've undertaken many other separations where this has been a relevant consideration. And obviously, it doesn't make any difference whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, but the case of the Jewish twins gave rise to this halakhic analysis because the shaila was asked. People aren't asking shailas in regular cases, but here they did. So, but what you've got here is this fascinating interplay on this issue of murder. You can't get a more serious question in halacha than murder, but with other factors coming into play, which is who is more alive and who is less alive. There's no question, by the way, that euthanasia is an issue. In the British courts, I brought you a ruling by the British courts that ruled that you could sacrifice the parasitic twin because their quality of life was much lower, and it was a mercy to put the life out of its misery. That's never going to be a relevant halakhic issue, because euthanasia, ending a life prematurely because you feel that its quality is not worth saving, is not going to be a factor that will allow that. But interestingly, in the British decision that I brought you in the notes, that was a factor. So that's something that's not going to be read in halacha. Anyway, so there we are. I brought you at the end quite a lot of further reading, and with all the links, so you can go and read away for the next 3 or 4 weeks on this issue of the conjoined twins. But that's basically how they understood it. If you're really interested, you could always take a flight to America and go and sit with Rav Moshe Feinstein or Rabbi Bleich, or Rav Moshe Tendler or Rabbi Bleich, and ask them what they personally feel about it as well. That depends on how much you want to do that. Okay, any questions? It's now 8:54 where you are, 10:54 where I am. I hope that was helpful, interesting. Thank you. A very nice comment from my father-in-law there. Thank you. The case of the Lakewood twins came up in the medical journals. Interesting. I'm not surprised. Medical ethics course in King's College. Very good. Excellent. My father-in-law has an MA in medical ethics, and clearly that was one of the cases that they studied, their famous case. Any other questions, observations, thoughts? No? Yes, Martin.
Sorry, can I ask?
Oh, yes. Someone else who's not Martin. Yes.
Sorry. So do like Siamese twins or congruent twins? Sorry, I don't know the difference. Well, Siamese twins can be separated. Congruent can't always. Is that the thing?
No. Siamese twins and conjoined twins are exactly the same thing. It says it's not politically correct to call them Siamese twins anymore.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So we call them conjoined twins. Whether they can be separated or not depends on the extent to which they are conjoined and which vital organs they share, and the medical expertise to be able to separate them.
Okay. So can I just ask you, does that not normally happen anymore? Like, I mean, was that just something that used to happen like a long time ago, or does it still happen?
No, it still happens. In fact, it happens more now than previously. Obviously, when abortion is now available pretty much freely, a case of conjoined twins in almost every situation you could imagine would be picked up on a scan, I imagine, and would be aborted long before it ever got to a full term. So therefore, I think it's going to be very rare now, because of scanning technology and the ability to do abortions, that a conjoined twin is going to be born. Therefore, I think that's actually it's a good point you're making. I think that's why many of these cases have been quite old. Although there have been some fairly recent conjoined twins born. You tend to find that they're born in like Africa or Asia or places like that, maybe where it wasn't picked up on the scans. But I don't know if this is happening in America or in England. The doctors online would know more about that than me, but you don't hear of many cases in the Western world. I suspect because they don't come to term.
If you had to,
Yes, Martin.
Sorry, only go.
Who's going?
You're going.
You go and then I'll go.
They are very, very rare, and the fact that they appear to have occurred in far, far away is only a reflection of their rarity. And it's a bit of a navel gazing, because really it is so rare. And as you've already pointed out, we are very, very unlikely to see anybody asking this halakhic question. And the fact that this happened in America 30 years ago is really quite exceptional.
Right. I imagine that they didn't have scanning facilities in the 70s, or if they did, that because this was a religious couple, they wouldn't abort the child. I imagine that's why this happened.
But can that not happen again today? Because in the frum world, people don't use scans. You don't have any scans done.
That depends on the situation. It's an interesting shaila actually as to whether a Rav would give permission to abort conjoined twins in this situation, where clearly if they were born, they would die anyway within a short time unless there was massive medical intervention. That's a good question. It could be that they would, even a religious couple who asked a religious question to a Rav could be given permission to abort these children.
How would they know they were conjoined if they weren't having any scans?
Okay, well,
You'd
they wouldn't
be able to find out from the regular scans. They wouldn't have the specific one.
But my experience is that religious couples do have scans. I don't know.
Yeah, but the basic scans would show they were conjoined.
I think so.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I imagine that if they can't spot on a scan that the two are conjoined, then then the scans are not worth really much, I would have thought.
It's a pretty poor scan. I mean, you can imagine a frum couple who wouldn't normally have a scan, and then something happens in the pregnancy and there is a concern. Unfortunately, Alan and I are aware of a couple like this, and an incidental finding is made, which is disastrous and wasn't even suspected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they might just decide to abort it.
Right. Absolutely. They have successfully separated cranially conjoined twins as well. Quite recently, there was an Arab.
Did that about 2 years ago.
Yes.
2 years ago, they did. They separated, but both of the children, I think, were mentally challenged afterwards. I think they did have problems.
Yeah.
But a long, like a 24-hour operation, I think.
Right.
It was shown on television. It was interesting.
Right. That's not a surprise at all. Someone just mentioned on the case, the British case, which I think the case is what I referred to in footnote 35, which is the British twins in 2000. I think that was the Re-A case, which referred to the Lakewood judgment, where they allowed the parasitic twin to be killed for euthanasia kind of reasons. But I think that was the Re-A case. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. Okay, very interesting. It is now 9 o'clock. I thank you very much for your focus. It makes a big difference having the cameras on. It's much better, I think so. Anyway, so I'm very grateful that you were able to do that. And thank you again to the community for inviting me.